So, okay, here's the thing. I've been making YouTube shorts, mostly about D&D for a little over a year now, and it's gotten me some success. But I've been thinking about it, and I've been like, I think this channel needs kind of a change up, like, you know what I mean? And so I've been kind of looking around, seeing what kind of material has been working on like other people's channels and things, and I've come across this kind of epiphany, this realization about like something really cool that I don't think people have done a lot of before. Because there's two kind of genres of YouTube video that I've noticed been getting really popular, right? So the first is it's less a video, but it's the same kind of thing. It's live streaming, right? Um and with live streaming, you don't get to like edit your video, so it's all very like stream of consciousness. So that's whatever. But it does allow this kind of like immediate engagement with your audience. So you have the immediate engagement, even though you don't get like the editing. Then on the other hand, you have video essays, which I think a lot of people, a lot of people, including me, really like watching a lot of video essays. And while video essays are obviously pre-recorded, so you don't really get that like engagement, like an immediate interpersonal engagement. You do get like the really crisp, clean like editing, and you can edit it together into this beautiful thing. So on the one hand, you have the live stream, which you don't get to edit it, but you do get like the immediate interpersonal engagement. And on the other hand, you have the video essay, which you don't get an immediate kind of ability to engage with the creator, but you do get like this really nice, clean editing. And so I was thinking about it, and I was like, what if you took these two different things and you combined them? So, what I'm going to do as a celebration for my 800 subscriber milestone, I am going to make a video that has all of the interactability of a video essay and all of the crisp, clean edits of a live stream. And I figured, what's something that I know a lot about that I can talk about unedited for however long this is going to be? And of course, the answer to that, as anyone who knows me would immediately be able to tell you, is Star Trek. So, I present to you, without any audio editing whatsoever, a complete history of the Star Trek franchise, as remembered off the top of my head by me with no research and operating on about 5 hours of sleep. So let's begin. Quick disclaimer: I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I'm a big Trekkie, but there are some Star Treks I haven't seen. I haven't seen most of the very new Star Trek shows. I haven't seen Prodigy, Strange New Worlds, or Picard. So I'm not going to be going into as much detail about those. Those are going to be mostly based on what people I know have said, what people I've seen online. And then just kind of my understanding of like this video is going to be mostly focusing on the history of the franchise from our world perspective, um, as opposed to like an in-universe history. This isn't a lore video. This is a like a recounting of like franchise history. Then the second disclaimer: we are not going to be covering any of the Star Trek movies. I understand they have a very important place in the history of the franchise. However, at the risk of sounding like a fake fan, I have only seen one Star Trek movie. It was the one with the whales. For those of you who are not Trekkies, that's Star Trek Episode 4, The Voyage Home. It is often called the one with whales to the point that I believe this was the case at one point. I don't know if it's still the case. The Wikipedia page, there's a Wikipedia page just called The One with the Whales, which redirects to Star Trek Episode 4, The Voyage Home. So I'm not going to be covering the films in any detail. And I'm not going to be able to go into as much detail about the newer Star Trek shows. But with that out of the way, let's get started. So, the year is, and again, this is all completely off the top of my head. I did not do research. Oh, sorry. Additional disclaimer. Don't necessarily quote me on anything I say in this video without double checking first, because while I am the world's most intelligent man and I know everything absolutely perfectly off the top of my head, there is a small chance that I made a mistake. And so if I say something wrong, if you don't know anything, if you don't know that I said something wrong, you might not know that I said something wrong. Double check before you quote me on anything in this video. So the year is 1960 something. And there is a man with a dream. That man's name is Gene Roddenberry, and his dream goes like this. He says, "Hey, this is 1960s America. We're a little bit at the height of the Red Scare. Everyone's scared of communists. Everyone's really gung-ho about capitalism and America and how Russia is bad and communism is bad, and we have to all be good Christian American capitalists right now. So what if I made a TV show that was about space communism, where one of the main characters was a Russian guy and everybody got along super well?" And so he started working on it. There was a very long and very complicated series of attempts to get the show started. He would there was several pilots where they would make a pilot, ship it out, show it to people. No network would want to pick it up. Make a pilot, ship it out, show it to people. No network would want to pick it up. A funny side detail here is that one of the things Gene Roddenberry kept doing was he kept casting his wife, Majel Barrett, in like a main role. And at least one of the executives that he tried sending the show to was like, "Oh, you can't have like a woman in like a main character role. So like get your wife out of here, Gene. What are you doing?" And Gene's like, "But my wife is the coolest person ever. I'm the original wife guy." And the guy's like, I don't know what a wife guy is. The internet hasn't been invented yet." And Gene's like, "Yeah, okay." So Gene has been trying to get this show on air and has been not able to do it. Everything looks bleak. The entire future of the world is at stake at this point. And then enter Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball, for those of you who were not alive during the 1960s, which, knowing my audience, is probably everyone watching this right now, if anyone is still watching. Lucille Ball was at the time called the Queen of Television. She was an actress who was known for a sitcom called I Love Lucy, which was a sitcom. It was a family sitcom, so it was more in line with the thing like Modern Family than it was in line with some other modern kinds of sitcoms like the Seinfeld style sitcom, which is also where How I Met Your Mother came from, or the more narrative style sitcom like The Good Place. But it was a kind of a family sitcom that was about this woman named Lucy. I also haven't watched that, so I can't give you detail about it. I know that there was a running joke of someone saying the name Lucy in a funny way. The point is, Lucille Ball, very important and influential figure in Hollywood at this time. Everyone loved her, everyone respected her. She was like the darling of the world. Then she happened to see one of these Star Trek things go across her desk when she was being the important person of the world. And she was like, "Oh, hey, for reasons that I will not clarify, because I'm not allowed to, because we're living in an era where if you show even the slightest hint of communist sympathizing, you get blackballed from Hollywood. I really like this show, this cool, fun sci-fi show. So I'm gonna say, let's put on this show. Let's air Star Trek. This could be cool." And the other executives were like, "I think we probably shouldn't do that. This doesn't seem like it'll be good or like make us any money." And Lucille Ball was like, "I'm sorry, I'm Lucille Ball. I own you." And they were like, "Okay, we're putting on Star Trek now." So they started airing Star Trek. There were a couple of changes between the pilot and the show. For one thing, they switched the main character from Captain Christopher Pike, played by, I don't remember his name, to this other guy whose name was, I think, James T. Kirk. And he was played by this actor nobody has ever heard of or cared about, named William Shatner. And then they also, in the original pilot, the first officer was, as mentioned before, played by Gene Roddenberry's wife, Majel Barrett, and she was just called Number One. Um, but again, people were like, you can't just put your wife as the main character of the TV show, no matter how big of a wife guy you will be in 60 years when the internet is invented and people come up with the term wife guy. So Gene Roddenberry is like, okay. So instead, he kind of boosted one of the other characters, who was a space alien named Spock, played by Leonard Nimoy. And made him kind of the secondary character to this Captain Kirk character. So you wound up with Captain Kirk and Spock, and then Gene Roddenberry was like, hey, do you think if I put my wife in a wig, any of the executives who tried to prevent her from being in the show will recognize her? Turns out they didn't. So one of the other major characters in Star Trek is this uh, is this nurse named Nurse Chapel, who is blonde and is clearly like wearing a blonde wig to hide from the executives, but is one of the most memorable characters in the show. Um, so that kicked off Star Trek. It ran in the late 60s for 3 seasons. Um, it starred Captain Kirk and Spock, the alien. We find out he's a Vulcan. They don't repress their emotions. They control their emotions. It's a whole thing. There were also a colorful cast of other characters. There was this cranky, middle-aged Southerner doctor named Leonard McCoy. The communications officer was a famously very beautiful woman named Lieutenant Uhura. There was also, as mentioned, one of the main characters uh, was a Russian guy named Chekhov, who the running joke with his character is that he insists everything was invented in Russia. Like, at one point, someone is drinking scotch, and Chekhov is like, that scotch was invented in Russia. And it's like, I don't think that's true, but we'll let you keep saying that because we like Russians in this show. Then there was also a Japanese man named Sulu, played by George Takei, and there's also. I'm not just gonna start. For none of these shows am I going to just list all of the characters because that would just take all of your time. The point is, very much at the central core of Star Trek was this idea of, hey, this is 400 years in the future. Well, this is 300 years in the future. We're in the 2260s, and by this point, all of the stuff that we got going on now in the 1960s isn't a problem anymore. We're not fighting about communism or capitalism anymore. In the future, it's fine because everyone is a socialist. We're not like the Americans. Captain Kirk is an American and Chekhov is a Russian, and they're friends. Like, they're friends with each other. They're not like the Americans. The Russians aren't at war anymore. We've made up with the Japanese since World War II, so Sulu is here. There are, and this was a huge thing for the 1960s. There are white people and black people and Asian people on the same bridge as each other, working together as equals and as peers, and it's all like so accepted and normalized throughout the show. It's amazing. It's all about like acceptance and peace. And then the premise of the show was, in the future, Earth has made an alliance with a bunch of other planets, and now the USS Enterprise, call sign NCC 1701, is going out on a 5-year mission to explore new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before. So it's an exploratory mission to meet and hang out with cool aliens we're going to meet along the way. I have seen that at one point phrased as, everything on Earth is so perfect that everyone is so bored that the most important job is to just find new things for people to look at. I think that's kind of a disingenuous way of looking at it. The point is, exploration, and the Earth is all united and everyone is friends and it's cool, and we get to see uh people do very silly cheesy fight scenes with aliens, and Captain Kirk sleeps with green space women, and Spock says things are fascinating, and the music goes "Ah," and it's all very very 60s, very campy, very fun. The special effects are also very 60s. At one point, Captain Kirk picks up a stalagmite, and there's a whole joke in the Trekkie community that looks like a male genital. It's a whole thing. So Star Trek aired for 3 seasons, and it was great. And everyone loved it, and it was a smash hit, and it was perfect and amazing. And then it almost got canceled a couple times, and then it did get canceled. Um, then uh it was a big hit with a lot of people, but especially among uh this is going to be this is going to be a deeply upsetting sentence for a certain group of people watching this, if anybody is still watching this. Uh it was a big hit especially with women. Because I'm not a woman, as far as I know, and so I can't speak to anything about the female experience. I can't say why this was, but I know that it was. There were a lot of women ranging from there's a myth nowadays that it was all housewives who watched it just because they had nothing better to do, but that's actually not the case. I've heard that I've read that it was housewives, but also like ranging from housewives to like business women starting in the 70s, to all kinds of like women from all walks of life started really appreciating Star Trek, to the point that when it originally was going to get canceled, there was a flood of letters specifically from women watching the show that saved the show. So the reason Star Trek is even still around is because of all these women watching the show. Um then throughout the late 60s and 70s, as it was airing and going into syndication, which means reruns, um there started to form this kind of fandom around the show. If you went back in time and talked to them and said, "Oh, hey, is the Star Trek fandom starting?" They'd be like, "What is that?" Because at the time, the term fandom, as it kind of exists in the modern day, and even really the concept of fandom out as it exists in the modern day, didn't really exist. There were, of course, large collective fan groups in previous era. For one thing, famously, the Sherlock Holmes books had a huge fan presence, of people who loved the books, to the point that after Arthur Conan Doyle stopped writing the books, he had to start writing the books again because everyone kept pestering about him so much. Um, but um but it was really the start of what we consider to be fandom in the modern day. That started with Star Trek in the late 60s and early 70s, primarily among women who basically invented a lot of things that we nowadays kind of take for granted. The most notable and popular among these things nowadays is they would do this thing where there were two characters on screen who were not explicitly depicted as being in a relationship, and these women said, "Hey, what if we said they were in a relationship?" That would not get named shipping until about 20, 30 years later in the 90s, with this thing called the X-Files. But it was very much the origin of shipping as we know it. It was also the start of zine culture. It was also the start of fanfic as we know it. Um, Basically, if you enjoy any fandom space in the year 2025 or later, you have the Star Trek fandom to thank for it. So that was happening for the late 60s, early 70s, as was happen as the show was going into syndication. Then at the end of the 70s, they said, "Hey, Star Trek was really popular about 10 years ago. Let's Because at the beginning of every episode, they said it's a 5-year mission, right? At the beginning of every episode, they said it was a 5-year mission. Um so we only got 3 years. So what happened to the other 2 years of the 5-year mission? And so the answer to that came in the late 70s with the form of Star Trek the Animated Series. Star Trek the Animated Series was a Saturday morning cartoon that was based on Star Trek. It was So there are 2 facts about Star Trek the Animated Series that are important to keep in mind. One thing is that it was, at the time, the most expensive animated television show ever made. The other fact is that if you watch it, it is the most low budget looking thing you can possibly imagine. Um, the reason for this the reason for this disparity is because the vast majority of that budget went into paying the original Star Trek actors to reprise their characters in the cartoon, and there wasn't any money left over to do things like, you know, animation. However, they were able to do a lot of cool things. One thing you will notice as a recurring topic in Star Trek, in the history of Star Trek, one thing you will notice is every time that there comes an ability to make something look less human in Star Trek, every time there is a chance to make something look more alien, every time the opportunity arrives to reinforce this idea of, hey, let's have weird, wacky, insane stuff that is still people we can communicate with, every time that happens, Star Trek grabs that and seizes hold of it. We've seen it originally. There's a very famous episode of the original Star Trek series, which is about this creature called a Horta, which is a little pile of rocks, a little glowing pile of rocks that when the crew first encounters them, they're like, oh, there's this weird pile of rocks going around, and ooh, we should crack open these eggs and eat the delicious geodes inside or whatever. And then over the course of the episode, it becomes revealed, hey, this thing is a little pile of rocks, but it's also like a person. Like, this is an extremely inhuman alien. It's a non-humanoid person, but this is still a person that we can communicate with and that we can befriend. And in fact, in later shows, they even mentioned that there is a Horta who has joined like the United Federation of Planets Starfleet, which is what all of our main characters work for. So and they did that with 1960s special effects. They had a guy wear like a big like mat over his head so he looked like a pile of rocks and just like crawl around on the ground real fast. Um and then even then in Star Trek the original series, it was kind of preventatively expensive to do things like that all the time. So most of the aliens in Star Trek the original series just looked like humans. Sometimes it was humans with like weird eyeliner, but they still basically still just look like humans. Then the animated series happened and they realized, hey, it is exactly as expensive for us to draw a regular human as it is for us to draw a weird tentacle plant monster. It is exactly as expensive for us to draw a regular human as it is for us to draw Spock 300 feet tall. It is exactly as expensive for us to draw a human as it is for us to draw, like, a cat person or like a 3-legged, 3-armed weird alien guy or whatever. So because of that, they immediately started expanding outwards, and Star Trek the Animated Series is full to bursting with weird non-humanoid aliens. There are so many things in the animated series that are creative and inventive and just from a design perspective fascinating, because even though the writing of the show was always kind of not great and the general quality of the visuals and stuff were kind of charitably you could call them awkward, it was still very much a bunch of artists who were like, hey, we believe in this whole thing about no matter who you are or what you look like, we can still find common ground. And what better way to show that than for the guys we're finding common ground with to be weird plant tentacle things with 5 eyes, right? Because of course we can find common ground with that guy on Planet X. The guy on Planet X just looks like a human with weird eyeliner. The real test is, can we find common ground with this guy who looks like a fetish shrubbery? So Star Trek the Animated Series happened. It was, as I've said, at best awkward, but it still kept core to a lot of those Star Trek values. Then after that, it was kind of like, well, this show won't really be remembered very fondly by Trekkies a lot of the time, so we can just kind of like, okay, good run. We did the Star Trek 5 years. It was fine. Everything's great. And besides, like, people are kind of moving on from science fiction. Science fiction was a big thing in the 50s and the 60s, but like now we're maybe kind of moving on to like other things in the late 70s, early 80s. I don't think anything is going to happen anytime soon that like reinvigorates like excitement in like science fiction. Wait, hold on. Who's this guy? Oh my god, it's George Lucas. Hi, George Lucas. Are you making a movie for us to watch? What the frell is a Star War? So then they made Star Wars. That has almost nothing to do with Star Trek, as much as sometimes people will try to convince you otherwise. Star Trek and Star Wars are not have never really been like competing with each other. For one thing, for the vast majority of its history, Star Trek has been about TV and Star Wars has been about movies. I There is a stereotype in popular culture of Star Wars fans and Star Trek fans hating each other and always competing with each other. I'm a fan of both. I'm obviously more of a Trekkie, but I've never felt any particular ill will towards any Star Wars fans. Both shows have their value. The main important thing is they made Star Wars and it was an unimaginably massive success. To put into perspective how big of a success Star Wars was, the Muppet Show episode that featured Luke Skywalker as a character aired before the second Star Wars movie came out. They had a parody of Darth Vader who couldn't say, "No, I am your father," or any parody of that line because that movie hadn't been made yet. That was how immediately popular Star Wars was, that even the Muppet Show was riffing on them immediately. Side note, Muppet Show also had a parody of Star Trek. It was called Pigs in Space, and Miss Piggy played, I believe, arguably the Spock analog, but it could also be considered to be the Uhura analog. Anyway, so, Star Wars happened, and everybody exploded at the same time with regards to science fiction. Everyone was like, oh my god, science fiction is back on the menu. And then a lot of people, including a lot of people who grew up, 15, 20 years ago watching Star Trek, were suddenly like, hey, we can bring Star Trek back. And Gene Roddenberry, who was still around, was like, hey, we can bring Star Trek back. So they started making some movies, which, as I said at the beginning, I'm not necessarily going to be covering here. They made a bunch of movies. One of the movies was about space whales. It was pretty cool. But then, in the mid-1980s, almost 20 years after the original Star Trek, they retroactively named the original Star Trek The Original Series, which you'll hear me refer to as The Original Series or TOS going forward. And they made a new show called Star Trek The Next Generation. And it was terrible. Starting out. Oh god, hold on, I'm gonna get death threats. It was terrible starting out. The premise of Star Trek The Next Generation was that 100 years after all that other stuff happened in the original Star Trek series, there was a new ship that was also called the USS Enterprise, and there was a new crew also on the USS Enterprise. And now it is our job to go out and do what the crew of the original USS Enterprise did, but now we are 100 years further in the future, and there is new stuff happening, and there's new technology, and there's new technology both in universe and out of universe. We've got new special effects we can do, and also there is like new kinds of tricorders, new kinds of communicators, new kinds of spaceships. The ships are faster now, the explosions are bigger now, the music is louder now. This is how we get bum bada bum bada bum bada da 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 da. And this show is about Captain Jean-Luc Picard, who is a French guy played by a British guy, which everybody was cool with except I imagine all of the French people watching. Um, Played by Patrick Stewart, who many people nowadays also know as one of the main characters in the X-Men. Um, but among other things. And he was a very dignified, very straight-laced, very the D&D term would be lawful good, extremely lawful good, trending lawful, just like very straight-laced and straightforward. His first officer was this guy named William Riker, who was a bit more like the Captain Kirk of the original show, kind of more of like a adventurous, and he was famously very tall, very broad shouldered, this huge like bear of a man, with a after the first season, a big thick beard and this deep like booming voice. um and then a whole cavalcade of other characters. Interestingly, or I should say, notably, in the original series, there was a race of aliens who were kind of bad guys we didn't like, who were called the Klingons, who were this kind of generic nasty bad guys. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on with them, but it was the basic part of it was they were the nasty bad guys we don't like. In a future Star Trek series, there's a whole thing where there was like, 10 years before the original series, there was a huge war with the Klingons, but whatever. In Star Trek The Next Generation, one of the main characters is a Klingon who has joined Starfleet. So it's really reinforcing that idea of really, no matter who you are, no matter how scary and evil you are, no matter how much of like a bad guy you are not beyond us being like, hey, let's be friends, actually. Let's make peace with each other. Let's have this spirit of hope and optimism that drives us forward. And even when it comes to the guys who are just written as the bad guys, we can still befriend them. And we still have Lieutenant Worf, who is a Klingon and is also one of our friends. There was also someone named Lieutenant Commander Data, who was an android, a humanoid robot, who it has been the claim has been made by people significantly more clearly autistic than I am, like autistic as in like actually diagnosed as being on the autistic spectrum, that Lieutenant Commander Data is intentionally or not very much written to be an autistic character, which is interesting. Um, um, I think that probably wasn't intentional because, for one thing, I mean, oh god, we've all seen what it's like when television people try to write autistic characters. We all know what the Big Bang Theory is. Anyway, the point of Data is that he is a robot and he does not understand regular like quote unquote regular human things like emotions and social cues. And then that unintentionally comes across of a lot of autistic people. That unintentionally comes across with a lot of autistic people being like, "Hey, I also don't really get a lot of quote unquote normal social cues. I also say a lot of things that way Data says things. I really like Data." So Data became one of the most popular TNG characters. Um, there were a lot of other characters, as I said before. I'm not going to be able to go through every character of every show I go through, but it was notable that in the original Star Trek, it was almost all humans, with one Spock, who was a Vulcan. In Star Trek The Next Generation, there were more non-humans. There was Worf, the Klingon, as previously established. There was Data, who was a robot. There was also a half Betazoid woman, which means she has like slight telepathy powers. Um, there was also, interestingly, if anyone watching this has heard of Whoopi Goldberg, one of her first major roles was she played the bartender on Star Trek The Next Generation. Interestingly, she was inspired to start acting by seeing Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek the original series. That's kind of what one of the things I was meaning when I was like, a lot of people who grew up watching Star Trek would go on to make Star Trek. Um, so TNG started the first. It is generally regarded that the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation is not very good, including some things. There is an episode that is often regarded as one of the worst Star Trek episodes of all time. It's called Code of Honor. It is let's not beat around the bush here. It's kind of super extremely racist. There's also the bizarre decision to just randomly kill off one of the best characters for no reason. Like one of the main characters got killed off at one point for no reason. And you can tell that was a mistake because after the first season, they kept trying to bring that character back. There's a time travel episode where she shows up. We find out at one point she had a kid nobody knew about. Like they keep being like, "Oh yeah, this character is dead, but we really like the actress and we really wish we hadn't killed her, so let's bring her back." The first season was not good. The second season, I'm going to be diplomatic here. The second season, many have described it as the turning point of the show that made the show better. Going forward from the second season, TNG would go on to become one of the defining like sci-fi shows of all time. It was beloved by so many people, absolutely just like a revolution in science fiction, an icon of the era. It is to this day, I would argue, possibly among people who like are into science fiction, Star Trek The Next Generation is probably the most popular Star Trek of all time. In like the broader cultural context, Star Trek the original series with Kirk and Spock is the one that the most people know about. Among sci-fi people, TNG is like the popular one. I mean the original series is also the popular one, but TNG is TNG and TOS are more or less on the same level. Then, unfortunately, as time must come for us all, partway through the production of Star Trek The Next Generation, and after again managing to get his wife onto the show, Gene Roddenberry passed away. Not I don't believe he was I don't believe he was like died in any kind of unnatural way. I believe he just like it was his time. Um and so, but the Next Generation kept going, and they kept making the show. It went on for season after season, and it kept getting better and more popular. And then there was one episode where they said, "Hey, we do a lot of kind of analogies in this show. So like we'll have an episode where it's like, oh, this episode is about like a giant space monster, but actually the space monster represents xenophobia. Or this episode is about like an alien who loses their psychic powers, but it's actually about like disability. Or this episode is about like a race of aliens that are unfamiliar with the concept of gender and sexuality, but no, it's actually about being queer." Um, and then they had one episode where they were like, "Hey, let's do an episode about the Jewish diaspora." And so they invented a race of aliens called the Bajorans, who were, as with a lot of races in Star Trek, visually they just looked like humans with bits on. The specifically their bits where they had like a series of ridges running down their nose, like wrinkles. But they very much had like, oh, we had like this, like we have this like these very passionate religious beliefs. We have been invaded and oppressed and attacked by this race of Nazis. Oh, sorry, I mean Cardassians, who are a race of like evil lizard people. And now there is a member of this persecuted religious minority who is serving on the USS Enterprise, and her name is Ro Laren. And there's a whole episode about it, and then at the end of the episode, we finish it, and it's all fine. And now, as with every other thing we do in Star Trek, we saved the day. We fixed this particular problem. Now we can move on to the next thing. And then someone was like, hey, wait a minute. There's still stuff going on with the Bajorans and the Cardassians. Like, as with 37,000 other races of aliens, we did just pop in, say, hey, what's up, and then move on with our lives. Excuse me. But, like, surely there's still stories to be told there. There's still stories to be told with the like the space Nazis and the space Jewish people. Like, we could do something with this. And so then somebody had this idea where they were like, what if we made a new Star Trek show while Star Trek The Next Generation is still running? What if we made a spin-off show that's specifically about these like the Bajorans and the Cardassians? So they started work and they made a new show. And this show is called Star Trek Deep Space Nine. The premise of DS9 is, hey, the evil lizard people just withdrew from their occupation on the Bajoran homeworld. The planet of Bajor is basically in ruins after the past, like, 50 years of a horrible occupation. So we, Starfleet, mostly who is Starfleet is the people from the last two shows. We are going to go in and help Bajor rebuild their world, and maybe at some point in the future we are going to be able to pave the way for Bajor to join the Space United Nations, which is to say the United Federation of Planets. And it's all great and it's all fine, and the guy who the captain who the commander who we sent to take over the space station that's going to be helping Bajor rebuild just discovered a stable wormhole to the other side of the galaxy right next to Bajor, which is cool. It's gonna make Bajor a center for trade, and like they're gonna be like an economic powerhouse, and it's gonna do all these cool things. And oh, hey, what's that you said? Commander Sisko went into the wormhole, and it turns out the gods of Bajor live in there, and they made him Jesus. So yeah, the premise of Star Trek DS9 is this very interesting and very compelling interplay between the people of Bajor trying to rebuild after the collapse of their war, this exploration into a new part of the galaxy that nobody we've ever met has ever been to before. All of Star Trek takes place inside the Milky Way galaxy, mostly inside like one of the quadrants of the Milky Way galaxy. So when we find a stable way to immediately transport ourselves to the other end of the galaxy, that's really interesting. We can go over there and find stuff. So there's Bajor rebuilding after this brutal occupation. There's all this new exploration going on over in the Gamma Quadrant, and also, oopsie, the guy in charge of the Starfleet station is Space Jesus, and also pointedly doesn't really particularly want to be Space Jesus, but all of the people, all the higher ups at Starfleet are like, we really want to befriend the Bajorans. So we're gonna keep Space Jesus stationed at the Bajoran space station because we want to be on their good side, and we don't want to take away their Space Jesus. DS9 starts, and it starts going, and it's honestly, spoiler alert, my favorite Star Trek show. It is unbelievably well done. It's so well written. It's beautiful. Even the intro music is great. La da da da, la da 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 da, la da da da, la da da da. It's just Oh, it's so good. And like the visual effects have progressed since Star Trek The Next Generation, so it's even better than that. They're addressing interesting new social issues. One of the core things about DS9 that makes it different from the first three Star Trek shows is all three of the first three Star Trek shows, the original series, the animated series, and the Next Generation, take place on starships, where they're zooming around, visiting different planets and stuff. Star Trek Deep Space Nine takes place on a space station. Basically, it takes place in a city. So they're in one place. There's way more like recurring characters, recurring themes. There's all kinds of like elements of stability that are here that haven't been in previous Star Trek shows, which is also one reason why a lot of people think it's not really Star Trek. And here we have to talk about a kind of controversial topic. I hope that nobody mails a bomb to my house for this conversation. But now we're going to talk about the two different groups of Star Trek fans. Because this is the part where the hooray, we're all fans of Star Trek and let's all watch Star Trek together and ain't it great, we can all find common ground thing starts to kind of come apart at the seams a little bit. Because so starting with DS9, there is a division in opinion. Before DS9 happened, everyone was like, oh, we like Star Trek. After DS9 started, it started to be like, okay, there's two different kinds of Star Trek fan. The first kind of Star Trek fan, which for the sake of clarity, I am going to be referring to this type of Star Trek fan by a term that some people, I believe, in that group have said they like should be the name of the fandom. I'm going to refer them as Trekkers. So Trekkers are the first type. The second type I'm going to keep calling Trekkies. Trekkers, Trekkies. Trekkers are, I don't want to make too many broad generalizations, but generally tend to be straight men. Cis-het men is the fancy term for it. Generally tend to be straight men, often tend to be white, and in general, again, I don't want to make too many broad generalizations here, but in general, tend to like Star Trek more as a fun, engaging science fiction series and less as a socialism metaphor. Which is completely valid. There are a lot of deep things that I watch for non-deep reasons, right? There are plenty of shows that are about deep and profound topics that a lot of people just watch because they like the pretty girls in them or whatever. That's fine. That's not a problem. Trekkers do tend to kind of discard any part of Star Trek that is, how do I say this delicately, progressive. Again, this isn't the end of the world. A lot of people misinterpret shows. But these are the people who you will hear being like, oh, I don't like the I don't like the politics of modern Star Trek. I don't like how they keep getting all political, right? These are these people. These are Trekkers. I've known Trekkers. They're not bad people. They're not trying to hurt anybody. Neither are Trekkies trying to hurt people. Trekkers are just doing their best to enjoy the thing they were raised on. In general, they really like the original series and the Next Generation and tend to kind of discard everything else. Second group is Trekkies, which is, I would argue, more in descent of the people, the original fandom of the show that did all of the fanfic, that did all the fan magazines, that did all of the letter writing campaign to get Star Trek back on the air after it was canceled in the 60s. All of that, I believe that more clearly leads into the Trekkie side of the fandom, which I would also argue looks a bit more like the fandoms thing that we think of today, with things like fanfic and fan art and shipping, so much shipping. Star Trek invented shipping as previously established. Basically the way that you can think of it is The Trekkies are the straight guys who like Star Trek. The Trekkers are the straight guys who like Star Trek. The Trekkies are the gay people who like Star Trek. That's not a perfect delineation for obvious reasons. That's kind of a very simplified way of saying it. So moving forward, I am going to be mostly talking, in case it wasn't obvious from that very obvious bias earlier, I'm mostly going to be talking as a Trekkie about these shows, because most of the things Trekkers have to say about Star Trek are mostly about the original series and the Next Generation. So, DS9. Another thing about DS9 that has a lot of controversy is that DS9 as a show is significantly darker in tone than other Star Treks. Um, Star Treks previous to Star Trek Deep Space Nine are they're not light exactly, but they tend to be a lot more on the hopeful and optimistic side of things. With DS9, it's like, hey, this show is at its core about the repercussions of imperialist oppression, right? That is concretely the basis of DS9. The basis of TNG is, hey, humanity had a lot of problems 300 years ago, but now we're fine. DS9 is about, what about the people who aren't fine? And also, extremely controversially, maybe humanity isn't all that fine either. It is, even so, exceptionally well written. It's a lot more narratively focused than other Star Treks. There is a lot more serialization where there will be long story arcs, and the whole thing is kind of interconnected in like an interesting narrative serial way, as opposed to other Star Treks, which were more about like episodic things where it's like, oh, here's an episode where we go to the pirate planet. Here's an episode where we go to the racism planet. Here's an episode where Counselor Troy loses her telepathy. So that's basically where we are with Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Now a couple of seasons into DS9. So in the background of this, Star Trek: The Next Generation comes to an end. It lives at a nice natural life cycle. I think it's 176 episodes, 192 episodes, something like that. 7 seasons. Just like a nice round life cycle. In my extremely biased opinion, 7 seasons is the right length for that kind of show. It comes to an end a couple of seasons into DS9. Then DS9 starts doing some interesting things with a race of people. That there's a lot of alien races in DS9. I keep saying the word race when I don't mean to. There's a group of people in DS9 called the Maquis. The Maquis, basically, there was a whole thing where the Space United Nations and Space Nazi Germany like brokered a peace agreement, and as part of this peace agreement, they uh um like traded a couple of planets where it was like, okay, guys can have these planets and we guys can have these planets. The problem is some of those planets had colonists on them. And so suddenly there's a group of people who were previously living in the Space United Nations who now find the entire planet they're on to be part of Space Nazi Germany. So they go, hey, to hell with this, let's start doing resistance. And the problem is, Star Trek is not perfect. I do think it was kind of a mistake to frame these people as the bad guys. Anyway, these people are called the Maquis. They go on to be a recurring thing in DS9. They're fighting back against the Cardassians, who are the space Nazis. Those are the lizard guys from earlier. And the problem is, because Starfleet and the space Nazis are kind of have this uneasy alliance. That means that Starfleet also needs to kind of stamp out the Maquis as much as the lizards do. So this goes on for a while. And then somebody out here in the real world is like, hey, it was a really good idea to spin off Star Trek into Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So like, what if we did that again? So they made a new show. There's a new spin-off of Star Trek called Star Trek Voyager, where the premise is Okay, listen. The entire like hour and a half long first episode is devoted just to explaining the premise and like how they got there and what's happening with it and what's going on. Not important. I am going to summarize this as succinctly as I can. Basically, there's two ships. There's a Maquis ship with a bunch of resistance fighters on it. There's a Starfleet ship with a bunch of Starfleet guys on it. They both get accidentally transported to the other end of the galaxy, a different other end of the galaxy than the thing with the wormhole from earlier. They get transported into the Delta Quadrant, which is, even at their highest speed, a 70-year trip away from Earth. And now the Maquis ship gets destroyed. The Maquis all come aboard the Starfleet ship. Now there is a combination crew of Starfleet people who are very like, yes, we must adhere to like the tenements of the United Nations of space. And Maquis people who are like, the only uniting factor we have is that we're resistance fighters fighting against the Nazis. And these two crews have to join up and work together in order to get home from the Delta Quadrant. Here's another controversial opinion. I really like Voyager. Voyager, much like Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Voyager and DS9 both tend to be much more popular with Trekkies than they are with Trekkers. Trekkers, again, are mostly about TOS and TNG. Voyager and DS9 tend to be very popular with Trekkers. There's a lot of Voyager also kept a lot of the same tone as DS9, but it uh uh went back to kind of the more traditional like the more traditional Star Trek thing of like, oh, every episode is its own unique story. There is an overarching narrative plot, but it's not nearly like as like ground down into every episode as with DS9. DS9, I would say more than half of the episodes in DS9 are about the plot of DS9. Voyager, most of the episodes of Voyager are just like one-off episodes that are connected by the same characters and by the fact that they're all still trying to get home from the Delta Quadrant, but they are separate episodes. I just realized I completely forgot to mention an important thing about Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager. Captain Kirk from Star Trek the original series was a white guy. Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek TNG was a white guy. Benjamin Sisko from Star Trek Deep Space Nine was a black guy. Catherine Janeway from Star Trek Voyager was a woman. This might explain why there are some people who don't like these shows. I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you that there aren't jerks in the Star Trek fandom. Everybody wants to say that their particular group is like the good group where there's no bad guys in it. There are racist people in the Star Trek fandom. There are misogynistic people in the Star Trek fandom. It sucks. It's the world we have to live in. I'm so sorry. Swear to God, most of us are not like that. Anyway, so Voyager, in my opinion, fantastic show. I love it almost as much as I love DS9. I grew up watching both DS9 and Voyager, and to some extent the original series. Amazing show. There's a lot of really great characters. Maybe someday after this I'll make like a Patreon exclusive thing where I talk about Tuvok. I have a whole thing about Tuvok and his Tuvok is one of the characters in Voyager. He's a Vulcan. He has, in my opinion, an interesting relationship to the idea of Vulcanness as compared to other Vulcan characters in Star Trek. To briefly summarize that whole tangent so I don't have to go in a 20-minute discussion about that right now, Tuvok is the only Vulcan in Star Trek, the only Vulcan main character who is actually fully a Vulcan. Anyway, I can explain that some other time. I'm gonna get comments of people being mad at me because they don't know my reasoning, but it's fine. So DS9 ended at some point, had a beautiful ending, wonderfully written. Voyager kept going a couple years after that. And then eventually Voyager also came to an end. It also had a beautifully written ending. Again, some of these are kind of controversial takes, but I'm saying what I'm saying. Then, after Voyager ended, they were like, hey, it's the early 2000s now. We're the cool new Star Trek people. We should make a new show that is like maybe like some of that last part of Voyager wasn't quite as wildly popular as other things. We did do a lot of like new cool things. As I said before, anytime Star Trek has an opportunity to make new freaky looking aliens on the budget of a weekly TV show, they grip it with two hands. There are cool CGI aliens in Voyager that look absolutely inhumanoid and are amazing. Also, one of the main characters of Voyager is a hologram, which is about as inhumanoid as you can get, considering he's basically a light bulb. Then they were like, okay, so Voyager maybe wasn't as popular as some of the previous Star Trek shows, so let's make up for that by having our new Star Trek show and have it not be Star Trek anymore. And that sounds really pejorative, but I can explain what I mean. So here is, up through 2001, the history of the names of Star Trek shows. First of all, we have Star Trek, which later got renamed Star Trek The Original Series. Then we have Star Trek The Next Generation. Then we have Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Then we have Star Trek Voyager. Then we have Enterprise. Not Star Trek Enterprise, Enterprise. They did realize their mistake shortly into it. Starting in either the second or the third season, they renamed and rebranded the whole show hastily because they were like, "Oh God, nobody's gonna watch this if they think it isn't Star Trek." When it started, it was just called Enterprise, and there are a couple of other interesting things about it. One interesting thing about it that made it not Star Trek: every previous Star Trek has had a completely orchestral theme song, right? So excuse me. So, Star Trek: The Original Series had da 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 da. Star Trek: The Next Generation had da 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 da. DS9 had da 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 da. Voyager had da 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 da. I think Voyager has probably the most beautiful Star Trek theme. Anyway, so they all had like these beautiful orchestric, symphonic, just like beautiful pieces of music. The credits theme for Star Trek Enterprise was a pop song from the movie Patch Adams. It's good. I think that the Enterprise intro is one of the best Star Trek intros for a couple of reasons that I won't say here because I'll get bombs mailed to me about it. But they had an orchestra theme for Enterprise. It plays during the end credits, but they just picked a pop song from a feel-good movie for the intro theme for some reason. They also made a couple of other interesting decisions about Enterprise, and now is as good a time as any to talk about a man that there are some people, if anybody is still watching this an hour into this rant, if anybody is still watching this, then some Trekkies will probably know what I'm about to talk about. There's a guy who worked on Star Trek. His name is Rick Berman. Rick Berman was a man who gained increasing power in the production of Star Trek, starting in the early 90s. He had I don't actually remember if he worked on TNG at all, but he had like a major hand in DS9. He had an increasingly major hand in Voyager. This man, I do want to clarify. Everything I'm about to say about Rick Berman, I'm going to say allegedly. Because I don't want to get sued. Rick Berman has been described, allegedly by people, as with a variety of colorful names, He has been called misogynistic. He has been called homophobic. He has been called a variety of other kinds of bigotry. He has been claimed to have a variety of a number of other kinds of bigotry. Um, he Some people have said that he is like the guy who ran Star Trek. I don't think he is like the linchpin of Star Trek in the 90s, but he was a major player. He uh Forgive me, fellow Trekkies, I'm about to talk about some things that are not good with Star Trek. He has been described as the reason why the episode about trans people in TNG was so poorly handled, and the reason why there wasn't something that could be considered a gay romance episode. He has been described as he did work on TNG because he was yeah, okay. He has been described as part of the reason why one of the main characters in Star Trek The Next Generation didn't have a gay romance. He has been described as one of the main reasons why there was fewer interesting stuff with gender and sexuality in DS9. There was a lot of interesting stuff with gender and sexuality in DS9. There was at least two characters who could arguably be referred to as having non-binary genders. But there was a famous episode of DS9 that was about basically about gay pride and lesbian issues. There was but other than that, there are famously a lot of times when Star Trek almost did a really cool thing, a really cool progressive thing about queerness or about women or about something, and Rick Berman put his foot down and said no. Also, much more concretely, Rick Berman was allegedly, a horrible and abusive serial harasser of the women working in Star Trek. There's a character in DS9 who is one of the best characters in the entire show. She's one of those characters who I described earlier as could arguably be described as having a non-binary gender identity. She's really cool, extremely talented as an actor, extremely intelligent as a character, intelligent, capable, badass, has one of the best character arcs in the show, just like doing a bunch of cool stuff. Just a fantastic character. And this character had to leave the show in the penultimate season because the actor playing her was so continuously tormented by Rick Berman. Rick Berman was so cruel to this actress that after 6 years she was like, I can't do this anymore, and she left. She left to and wound up being in another show that like most people haven't even seen. Like, this was Star Trek almost at the height of its popularity. This was a huge thing. It was like an unfathomably terrible thing to have to leave Star Trek, but she was just like, I couldn't do this anymore because of this serial harassment. There are all kinds of stories told about it where he would complain about her not being attractive enough. He would tell her she needed a bigger bust size. He would just like go after her ruthlessly and cruelly, allegedly, to the point where she had to leave the show. Also, there is a running theme in Star Trek of female characters who are interesting and nuanced and complex and deep, and also walk around in skin-tight jumpsuits for literally no good reason at all. And allegedly, a lot of this has been placed in the hands of Rick Berman. Generally, it tends to be about once per show. In TNG, it was Deanna Troi, who is a really cool, interesting character who also wears a low-cut jumpsuit for no reason. Then, starting in about the third season of DS9, it was Kieran Reese, who's a super cool, badass resistance fighter character, who, again, starting in the third season, started to wear a slinky jumpsuit for no reason. Then in Voyager, Worst Offender, one of the best characters in the entire show, deeply interesting, complex. There's a whole thing with this race of cyborgs called the Borg, who like assimilate people, kind of like the Cybermen from Doctor Who. And this character manages to get taken out of the Borg collective, the first person to ever successfully sever from the collective, as far as we know at the time. And just this huge thing. And like a really interesting character of her, like a character arc of her discovering her humanity, fostering relationships with other humans for the first time since she was literally like 6 years old. Just like all of these like amazing writing decisions that were made, and all of it, she had to perform this amazing character. Jerry Ryan, the actress, had to perform this amazing character while wearing a series of skimpy jumpsuits that were, according to the actress, ranging from uncomfortable to sometimes painful to wear, all because certain allegedly Berman-esque people told her that she had to, because she, was an attractive person who wasn't technically supposed to be wearing a uniform like the other characters. So, hey, let's take this opportunity to take this really cool actress with a really cool character and basically put her into something one step above a bathing suit for the whole show. Pro tip to anyone making science fiction shows: you have two options. Either don't put anybody in stupid, skimpy jumpsuits, or put both men and women in stupid, skimpy jumpsuits. Why is William Riker only in like the low cut drapey thing in one episode? I'm saying this for entirely cishet reasons. The point is, don't unfairly target women with your stupid misogynistic outfits. Luckily, Star Trek has gotten better than that since then. It's just deeply aggravating and frustrating. And now you know why every time Rick Berman's name comes up on screen when I'm watching this with other Trekkies I know, everyone boos the screen when Rick Berman shows up. All that said, Rick Berman was the lead producer on Star Trek Enterprise. Oh no! So Star Trek Enterprise started, and it's interesting for a lot of reasons. It was started. The premise of it is that it is about 100 years before the original series. So all this other stuff we've been talking about has been taking place about 100 years after the original series. Enterprise takes place 100 years before the original series. It is basically the first deep space mission that humanity ever goes on. It starts off with them like I talked about the Klingons earlier. This is the first the first contact with the Klingons. And like we like go off into deep space and like meet the Klingons, and they're like, "Hey, Klingons, we're the humans," and the humans are like, "Patak," and we're like, "Oh, okay." And then once we get there, we keep going. And it's actually pretty interesting. There's a lot of stuff in this show that makes it very clear that Rick Berman was in charge. For one thing, one of the main characters is a cool Vulcan character who has an stop me if you've heard this. Stop me if you've heard this one before. A cool character with an interesting character arc, who always wears a low cut skimpy outfit, like a low cut skin tight outfit, just because she's an attractive woman. Rick Berman, allegedly. Also, there's a very funny in how blatant it is thing where it's like, oh, there's a special decontamination chamber you have to go into when you like get off a shuttlecraft, and it just so happens to be that everyone has to strip down to their underwear and rub oil on each other in this special decontamination room for science fiction reasons. Anyway, it also has a lot of like more. It also has a lot of like more. For one thing, as I said before about Star Trek always goes really, really non-humanoid as soon as they can. There's a lot of more like weird CGI stuff in Enterprise because it was the early 2000s, the heyday of weird CGI stuff. So they started doing weird things. There were like weird polygon people. There were like a lot of things where it's like these people have like 3 legs or whatever. They also brought back a couple of older races. Like at one point, the Gorn show up and they're like which are like lizard people from the original series, which in the original series very much looked like a guy in a rubber lizard suit. In Enterprise, they were CGI, and for the era, really good CGI. So there's a lot of stuff going on in Enterprise. It was Rick Berman stuff aside, and again, this is going to be out of everything I've said in this video so far, probably the single most controversial thing. Enterprise was a really good, really Star Trek-y show. If you watch episodes from the first 2 seasons of Enterprise, it's tonally and structurally, and just in terms of vibes, almost completely indistinguishable from TNG DS9 Voyager, right? It's a little bit, I don't know how to say this delicately. It's a little bit hornier. It's a little bit more like action sci-fi show, but in general, it still has this vibe of like, we're going out in the sense of hope and exploration. We're meeting for the first time, we're meeting all these people who are previously established characters in all the other shows. So it's like, here's the episode where we meet the Andorians. Here's the episode where we meet the Tellarites. Here's the episode where the Vulcans are a problem again. Here's the episode where we meet the Klingons for the first time, right? And it's just like really like a lot of really interesting stuff, a lot of really fun stuff. And then 9/11 happened. So if you're not American watching this and you're unfamiliar with arguably the most defining event of the past half century in the United States, on September the 11th, 2001, there were terrorists and they destroyed a major landmark, and America descended into this kind of extremely angry, extremely frustrated hellfire for about, hey, let's be real, I was about to say about 15 years. Some would say it hasn't stopped. One of the things about 9/11 that you have to understand is that when 9/11 happened, it got everywhere. You might have heard the story of French fries in America getting renamed Freedom Fries because there was this overwhelming thing of like, we gotta make everything as American as possible. It was like Pearl Harbor 2. And people, anyone who spoke out against the, hey, let's not sugarcoat this. Anyone who spoke out against the atrocities America immediately started committing, they got blackballed, they lost their jobs, they lost careers, they lost, like, there are people who were major cultural figures in the year 2000, and then America started doing war crimes. These people spoke out against it, and these people lost their entire career. Into the middle of this, you throw a Star Trek show. The point of Star Trek is, hey, 100, 200, 300 years in the future, we're not gonna be doing like wars and bad stuff anymore. We are friends with people. We solve our problems with diplomacy. The most powerful guy in the most powerful main character in the history of Star Trek is a guy who was raised as a diplomat and ambassador, right? Like, let's not do war. Let's not be bigoted. Let's not be Islamophobic, right? But if we say that clearly on screen in 2002, we're gonna get our show canceled, and most of the people working here are never gonna work in Hollywood again. So we have several options here. First option, never address it. Maybe get canceled and cut off the air for that. Second option, say that Islamophobia is bad on live TV and definitely get canceled because of it. Third option, let's have the third season of Enterprise be about space 9/11. So the third season of Star Trek Enterprise is about space 9/11. The details of this are not important because I assure you, we've heard a lot of silly stuff going through this story, but I assure you, the details of this particular story are quite stupid. there's an alien race who sends a giant super weapon to destroy most of Florida. I'm sorry, Florida. I'm not gonna make the low hanging fruit joke here about Florida. Um, and then it horribly traumatizes everyone on Earth and everyone on the ship Enterprise. And then we have to go into the Middle East. I mean, we have to go into this region of space that is totally not just the like our version of the Middle East. And we have to find Al Qaeda. I mean, we have to find the Zindi who built the weapon and are space aliens, and we're totally not being Islamophobic. And we have to do a war in Iraq. I mean, and you get what I'm saying. Like, the whole thing is very, very transparently like, hey, let's do space war on terror. To their credit, the end of the season, the conclusion of the season is we need to work together and make friends with them and do diplomacy instead of just doing a horrible war and wiping everybody out. Credit retracted because conveniently the guys who we make friends with are the ones who look like white people. All of the people in the Zindi who don't look like white people almost are the bad guys. The weird fish people are the bad guys. The bug people are the bad guys. The lizard people are the bad guys. The arboreals and the primates are wind up kind of being our friends, and they just so happen to be almost entirely white people, and almost entirely dudes. It's not well handled. It's bad. This is part of why Star Trek Enterprise is known, capital K, known as like the bad Star Trek. Because in the second, at the end of the second season and throughout the third season, there is this abrupt and deeply miserable tone shift. I said earlier that DS9 was darker than other Star Treks, and had kind of this reputation for being like more like dark and gritty. That ain't got nothing on Enterprise. Enterprise season 3, it's just grim, it's just unhappy, it's just miserable, it's just stupid. There's almost nothing redeemable whatsoever about season 3. And then they kind of struggled on for another season, and they were like, oh, we're gonna get 7 seasons, just like we did the last 3 shows we did, right? And then they got canceled after 4 seasons, unsurprisingly, because, hey, why did you do Space 9/11? It was bad. That's the end of Star Trek. Until 2009. So several years after the end of Enterprise, after everyone was very disillusioned with Star Trek and was like, okay, Enterprise collapsed into the ground very miserably, famously has one of the worst, like, finales in the history of the Star Trek franchise. Then they were like, hey, let's go back to basics. So a lot of people liked the original series with Captain Kirk and Spock. Let's do that again, right? So they started making a series of movies, starting with a movie called Star Trek. It's just called Star Trek. It stars Chris Pine as Captain Kirk, and it stars Zachary Quinto as Spock. It is basically a reinterpretation of Star Trek, the original series, into almost kind of like a more modern version of the story. As I said previously, I've only seen one Star Trek movie, and it wasn't this one. I'm just bringing this up because it was kind of important. They kept making these movies after a while. In the first movie, it gets established this is like a separate timeline from the rest of Star Trek, which makes it a big headache whenever you want to look up something about Star Trek, because it's split into 2 timelines now, because that went so well for the Legend of Zelda. So yeah, so they kept making this. it was like a whole thing. Some people watched them. Trekkies tend to not like these new movies. It's a whole thing. It's fine. And then Star Trek kind of gently petered out. Remember how Star Trek kind of gently petered out in the 70s, and then Star Wars happened, and then suddenly everyone's into sci-fi again? Star Trek kind of gently petered out in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and then along came this fun little thing. It's not like the biggest thing to ever happen. I don't know if you've heard of it. So hear me out on this. What if we had a couple of different movies with different characters in them, and then we joined them together into like one crossover where there was like it was kind of like a shared universe thing, right? That could be pretty cool. Let's call it, I don't know, it's like a cinematic universe featuring characters from this one series. Let's call it the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The Marvel Cinematic Universe made, hold on, let me check my notes here. It made every American dollar that has ever existed, most of the Canadian dollars that have ever existed, and a not insignificant number of euro. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, I would argue, one of the biggest franchises uh in the history of filmmaking. Quite possibly the biggest franchise. And that had this kind of knock-on effect with media in general, where suddenly everybody was saying, "Hey, let's do again. Let's again." They everybody after MCU got popular and everyone realized that the MCU was getting really popular and everyone kind of figured out, oh, hey, this connected universe means if you watch one, it's going to make you want to watch other ones. Everybody started doing it. They tried to do it for horror movies with The Mummy, and that didn't really work. They started doing it with Star Wars. Star Wars became an MCU. There's a whole horde of MCU alikes throughout the world, and one of the things that was affected by this kind of broader cultural shift towards franchiseification, shared universe thing was Star Trek. So starting in 2018, a full 13 years after the end of the last Star Trek thing, there were Star Trek. So there was Star Trek in the 60s, there was Star Trek in the 70s, then there was Star Trek continuously from about 1985 to about 2005. And then there wasn't Star Trek for about 18 years. And then they started a new Star Trek show, kicking off a whole franchise of other interconnected Star Trek shows. This new Star Trek show was called Star Trek Discovery. And oh boy, you thought Enterprise was unpopular. Star Trek Discovery, I would argue, out of all of the Star Treks we've talked about so far in this video, Star Trek Discovery is the most unlike any other Star Trek. Enterprise did its own thing sometimes and was kind of weird and then did Space 9/11. DS9 was kind of darker and more like kind of grim than some other Star Trek sometimes. Voyager was woman. Discovery, all of that, and then also some other things. Discovery, first of all, it was absolutely not serialized at all. It was it was absolutely not episodic at all. It was absolutely serialized. It was one continuous story. From the start of episode 1 to the end of the first season was just one story, which a lot of shows are doing nowadays. Second of all, unlike any previous Star Trek show, there were less than 24 episodes per season for all of Discovery. There was no episode of Discovery. There's no season of Discovery that was more than, I think, 10 episodes long. So it was much shorter than other Star Treks in format, and it was continuous. Even more than DS9, it was, in the first episode, things get started, and then at the end of the season, things get finished, and that whole season is one 10-hour long story. 7.5 hour long story, because an hour long television episode is 45 minutes. You know how television works. So, it was also significantly darker than other Star Treks, even darker than Enterprise Season 3, even darker than DS9. It was dark. The first season has the main character doing a mutiny to start a war, and it only gets worse from there. They also did a lot of things that were deeply unpopular. Like they brought back arguably the most unpopular part of DS9. There was like a secret organization in DS9 that nobody thought was a good idea. Um, and then they brought it back in Discovery and they changed it, thus ensuring that nobody who didn't like DS9 would like that, and nobody who liked DS9 would like that. They also, again, as far as the worst sides of the Star Trek fandom were concerned, the main character of Discovery was a black woman, who was, to be clear, an extremely cool character, and was very much not designed to be appealing to racist misogynists. So a lot of racist misogynists had a problem with it. Racist misogynists, of course, can absolutely go die in a hole. I feel like I don't need to clarify, we don't like racism or misogyny here on So Okay, Here's the Thing. But that just means the show was among certain demographics of the internet not going to be as popular. Which, hey, sorry, hold on. I need to pause for a second to make something absolutely clear. If you have to sacrifice appealing to bigots in the name of, like, representation, then you should sacrifice appealing to bigots. Like, right? Like, it's no contest. Capitalism is all like, oh, you always have to do the thing that gets you the most dollars. But hey, newsflash, out here in the world, we need more stuff with black women in it, right? We don't need like miscellaneous white guy executive mogul to get 7 more yachts for him to set on fire for his annual fire yacht party or whatever rich people do. We need more representation, right? I think most of the people, if anyone is still watching this an hour and a half into the video, I think like we can all agree on that. So Discovery. I have only seen the first 2.5 seasons of Discovery. I think it ran for 5 seasons, but I've only seen the first 2.5 seasons of it. I quite enjoyed it. I don't think it was very Star Trek-y. There are some things about it that are very Star Trek-y. There's one part of the first episode where this alien guy is talking to the main character. Doug Jones plays the character. If you don't know who Doug Jones is, yes, you do. You've seen Doug Jones' stuff. He just always wears 10 pounds of like alien makeup on his face. He was Slender Man in one of the Slender Man movies. He was like 2 or 3 of the iconic characters from the movie Pan's Labyrinth. He was like, he's just famous for being like a horror actor or like a creature actor. He's really cool. He plays a character named Saru in Star Trek Discovery. One of the best parts of the show. He's great. I just wanted to be clear. I'm not putting disrespect on Doug Jones' name. I also don't want to. It occurs to me I haven't said a lot of names in this so far. Sonequa Martin Green, who plays Commander Burnham, also really cool. She was also in another show that I watched growing up. She's also great. I don't want to put disrespect on her name either. I can't name all of the characters. You should assume, unless I go out of my way to talk about how Berman someone is, I mean how bad someone is as a person, just assume that like I'm on board with all these characters. You know, Cole Meany is great. Alexander Siddig is great. Nana Visitor, Kate Mulgrew, Patrick Stewart, Jonathan Frakes. Like the Star Trek, the history of Star Trek is filled. Avery Brooks. Oh my God, Avery Brooks, right? The history of Star Trek is filled with great actors doing an amazing job. Very rarely you will encounter a character in Star Trek who is not well acted, but it's basically never one of the main characters, and it's extremely uncommon to experience that. Star Trek is filled to the brim with amazing actors doing amazing jobs. Anyway, except I've said a lot of unpopular things in this video. I don't think even I am going to start openly talking about what a piece of shit William Shatner has been famously said to be. Excuse me for swearing. I'm sorry. I'm not really editing this video, so sorry for that. Sorry for any language. But just don't look up, like, don't William Shatner is a guy who exists and has some problematic takes and also some problematic narcissism, and I'm not going to keep talking about that. So, Discovery. I think Discovery, pretty good. There is, as I was saying earlier, there is a scene where Saru, as portrayed by Doug Jones, is talking to Burnham, as portrayed by Sonika Martin Green, and he says something along the lines of, on your planet, there is a complex food chain of different creatures, interacting with each other. On my planet, there are only two species, one of which is a predator and one of which is prey. And as I was watching that episode for the first time, I was like, that's Star Trek. That is the most Star Trek ass world building I've ever heard. That's so silly, and I am so on board for it. I think I might have mentioned that in my last Star Trek video that wasn't a short, which is the episode. I made a video about Star Trek needing more weird little guys. I haven't mentioned weird little guys a lot in this episode, but just let it be known, there's so many weird little guys in Star Trek. Go watch that video for more information. Um, um, so, Discovery wasn't the most popular among Trekkies or Trekkers. It's fine. I've heard good things about it. There are some cool stuff. A lot of aliens who we haven't seen in a while because we haven't had Star Trek in a while show up in Discovery. There are some Cardassians, there are some Ferengi, there are some Andorians. There's some fan service. There's some like of it's doing its own thing. It's not especially standout in how good it is. I would also argue it's not especially standout in how bad it is. Speaking of things that are bad and that nobody likes, then they decided to make a sequel series to Star Trek The Next Generation called Star Trek Picard. I don't know very much about this show. I've never watched Star Trek Picard. Based on everything I have ever heard about Star Trek Picard, it's not good. It is just hey, Trekkers, you liked Captain Picard in Star Trek The Next Generation. Let's do again. Let's again. So, it's like they took the format, again, from what I've heard, it's like they took the format of Discovery, of this kind of longer serialized show that was like very much more of a modern show and less of a Star Trek show. And then they just put a bunch of stuff from other Star Trek stuff into it. So Captain Picard is here. He's 30 years older and he's sad. Seven of Nine, that character I was talking about earlier, played by Jerry Ryan, is here, and she's not wearing a painful skin-tight bodysuit anymore, so that's a plus. I think Tuvok, who you also heard me mention earlier, shows up at one point. I think that the changelings from DS9 show up at one point. There's Vulcans, there's Romulans. Like half the cast of Star Trek The Next Generation come back to cameo in Star Trek Picard, including at least one character who basically died in Star Trek The Next Generation. Oh, sorry, including at least one character who did die in Star Trek The Next Generation. It is the pinnacle of the kind of thing that fans think they want when they actually don't, according to everybody I've ever heard talk about it. I've never heard anyone say good things about Star Trek Picard. Nope, sorry, I tell a lie. I once heard somebody say that the second season has better special effects in that they are more in line with previous Star Trek shows. Other than that, I've never heard anyone say anything good about Star Trek Picard. Then, in season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, they were like, hey, remember Spock from Star Trek the original series? Remember him? He was also briefly in Star Trek The Next Generation. He was also in those movies from 2009. What if the main character of Star Trek Discovery was Spock's secret sister and just didn't know about it. Like she knew about it. We didn't know about it. We just didn't know that like Spock had a sister this whole time. And it's her. It's the main character. They keep doing this. I haven't mentioned the movies a lot, but they also did Hey, Spock has a secret sibling in in one of the movies. It's so funny. They keep giving Spock secret siblings because he is the most interesting character in Star Trek the original series. Um um so Spock shows up, obviously played by a new guy. I think Ethan Peck is his name. He shows up in season 2 of Discovery, along with a guy who, if you've been paying attention, you wouldn't remember because I forgot to actually mention his name earlier. Captain Christopher Pike. Captain Christopher Pike, canonically, as established in Star Trek the original series, was the guy who was the captain of the Enterprise before Captain Kirk. So Captain Christopher Pike and Spock both show up in Star Trek Discovery. Then at the end of the season, they're like, well, gosh, let's get back to the Enterprise and have some more adventures. Spin-off! There's a new spin-off that they made after this. After that was called Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which, again, I haven't seen it. However, exact opposite of Picard, everything I've ever heard anyone say about Strange New Worlds is that it's great. I've heard a couple of I've heard someone say there was some shoddy thing they did with a pre-existing Star Trek race that they made them like bad and had like just a bad episode about it. But besides that, whatever. Besides that, I haven't heard anything but good stuff about Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It has a bunch of characters from Star Trek the original series, but let's again but they're all younger because the show takes place about 10 years before Star Trek the original series. And so Spock is there, but he's younger. Pike is there, but he's younger. Nurse Chapel, who is the character who is played by Majel Barrett in the original series, if you remember from an hour and 20 minutes ago when I was talking about that. Sorry, hour and 40 minutes ago. Is anybody still watching this video? Leave a comment. If you're still watching an hour and 42 minutes into this video, leave a comment telling me that your favorite character in Star Trek is Morn. Morn from DS9, Morn. Tell me that you love the 7 little wispy hairs on his head, because that's a DS9 reference. And so if you say that, because I almost guarantee nobody will remember that line from DS9 otherwise, if you say that, I'll know that you watched until an hour and 42 minutes into this video. So, Strange New Worlds. Nurse Chapel, who is played by Majel Barrett in the original series, is back. She's also in this show. I believe Uhura is also in this show. In the second season, I think Captain Kirk actually shows up, but like as a young twink instead of like an old William Shatner. So Strange New Worlds goes, and it's pretty good, and I've heard some good stuff about it. Then they made another show that I'm gonna talk about in a second called Lower Decks. I'll get back to Lower Decks. Then they made a show called Star Trek Prodigy, which is a CGI family cartoon, which is very interesting, and I don't know almost anything about it except that it has some Voyager characters in it. And I've heard some pretty good things about it. It was a kids cartoon, so obviously it didn't destroy the world, and actually it got canceled on Paramount Plus, where all this new Star Trek stuff is happening. But it got brought over to Netflix, so now Star Trek Prodigy is on Netflix. If you want to watch a kids cartoon set in the Star Trek universe, and you don't want to pirate anything, or if you don't want to subscribe to Paramount Plus, and if you have Netflix, you can go and watch Star Trek Prodigy. I can't verify that it's good, but I've heard nice things about it. Anyway, taking a step back, then the new person had an idea. They were like, hey. So remember how in the 70s there was a Saturday morning cartoon that was like an animated Star Trek show? And remember how a couple of years ago they started making this show called Rick and Morty? And remember how uh right around the time that we're having this conversation, either slightly after or slightly before, um they made this really, really good Netflix show called Inside Job. And remember how there is an untapped market of millions of Star Trek fans who are all extremely dorky about Star Trek and just generally huge fans of Star Trek and want more Star Trek and really like Star Trek. And remember how The Simpsons kickstarted an entire lineage of like adult oriented sitcoms, like animated adult oriented sitcoms? So hear me out on this. What if, as part of our sci-fi adventure series, we made a kind of like Rick and Morty-esque, Simpsons-esque, Inside Job-esque adult animated sitcom set in Star Trek? And hear me out. What if it was the best thing Star Trek has made in the past 20 years? So then they made Star Trek Lower Decks. Way back in the early 90s in Star Trek The Next Generation. There's an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Lower Decks. Important to understand for this conversation. Every Star Trek show that has happened so far is about the chiefs of staff, like the command crew of whatever they're doing. So Star Trek The Next Generation is about the captain, his first officer, the ship's therapist, the ship's doctor, all the people in charge. Star Trek Deep Space Nine is about the commander, the chief liaison to the Bajoran people, the chief of security, the chief science officer, the chief doctor, all the people who were in charge. In Star Trek Voyager, half of the crew of Voyager gets eaten by space worms or whatever in the first episode, and so the main characters of Voyager are the few remaining chief members, like commanding officers of Voyager, and the commanding officers of that Maquis ship that kind of got merged with Voyager, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of Star Trek is about the command crew. There's one episode of The Next Generation where they're like, "Hey, what are the lower crew members doing during all this? Like all those like random miscellaneous low-ranking ensigns running around in the background. What's their life like? Also, what if you cried about it?" So it's a famous episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Lower Decks, where the main characters of the show take a back seat, and a handful of miscellaneous characters that you've never really heard of before, except for one or two who were briefly in another episode. A handful of miscellaneous, very, very, very low-ranking characters, I'm talking bottom of the totem pole, characters, get their day in the limelight. And they're like, here's what it's like to work as a low-ranking ensign aboard the Starship Enterprise. And since then, there have been a couple of other episodes where that happens. In other Star Trek things. In Voyager, there was one, I believe it was called Good Shepherd, where the premise was there were 3 members of the crew who basically nobody had ever met because one of them was an incompetent stooge, one of them was a loner, and one of them was a hypochondriac. And so nobody ever talked to these people, and the captain is like, hey, we should go on an adventure with just me and these 3 people and see what's up. And it's weird, and a bug goes inside someone's arm. Don't watch it if you're afraid of centipedes. It's a good episode, though. And so they would do that occasionally, and then when it came time to make this, again, I can't emphasize how insane this is, adult animated sitcom set in the Star Trek universe, they were like, let's do that. What's the funniest thing about Star Trek? The funniest thing about Star Trek is the people in the background who keep getting killed off by funny space things, right? There's a term that I haven't actually used so far, but it's very important in the history of Star Trek. That term is red shirt, because in the original series, there was a running thing where they would go down to a planet and it would be main character, 1 or 2 security officers we've never seen before. And in the original series, the security officers wore red shirts. So in order to establish that the stuff happening in this episode is scary, when the monster shows up, he kills one of the guys in the red shirts. So that means that it came to be known that a red shirt was someone whose job in the episode was to die horribly because they're a minor expendable crewman. Um, so when Lower Decks came around, they were like, "Hey, let's make an entire show about the red shirts." Uh, I was about to say they don't die in Discovery, and then I was like, "Well, they do. At least one of them dies at least once." I feel like, um, but so the premise of Lower Decks is that it's about these like low-ranking crewmen kind of in the background while the captain and the first officer and the doctor and the chief security officer and whatever are doing like big cool adventure stuff up on the bridge. The ensigns are down in the lower decks like sleeping in bunk beds and one of them is talking wistfully about how he wants to be a captain someday. Um and this show is out of any show I've ever seen, it's made like it is more than any other like spin-off or sequel show I've ever seen, made by people who are fans of the original. Everybody who worked on Star Trek Lower Decks must have been a huge Trekkie because it is full to bursting with Star Trek stuff. It's jammed with Star Trek stuff. There's so much Star Trek stuff. One of the main characters of the show is a low-ranking officer on this ship. Was previously a low-ranking officer in universe. Was previously a low-ranking officer on the starbase Deep Space Nine from DS9. Characters from DS9 and Voyager and the Next Generation all show up in Lower Decks. There's there like races we like cool alien races we haven't seen since then show up. There's an episode where they go to the starbase DS9 and like meet some characters from there. There's an episode where they go on the starship Voyager and there's like stuff going on there. There's an entire episode that's just a parody of the Star Trek movies. It's like the whole thing is crafted, and it's not even like, because okay, this is an important distinction. Let's talk about two shows right now: Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Lower Decks. Star Trek Picard, again, from everything I've heard about it, was made by people, or at least at least the people who got the final say on it were people who were trying to cash in on Star Trek. And they were like, well, TNG was really popular. Let's bring Picard back and do a bunch of Star Trek stuff. Seven of Nine was the most popular character in Voyager. Let's bring Seven of Nine back. Let's do a bunch of fan service. Oh, hey, Tuvok is here. Oh my god, look, it's the changelings from DS9. Give me your money. Lower Decks is also full of Star Trek stuff, but that's because it was made by people who love Star Trek and wanted to do a bunch of stuff about Star Trek. That is the difference between something being made for fan service reasons and something being made by fans who are, at the risk of sounding a bit weird, fans who are servicing themselves. Every minute of Star Trek Lower Decks feels like it was made with love. Every reference is put in there. It feels like it was put in there because they wanted to put it in there. If anything, it feels like they didn't put in enough stuff they wanted to. As opposed to, again, as I have heard about Star Trek Picard, some of the stuff that shows up in there feels like it was mandated by an executive to be in there. Anyway, Star Trek Lower Decks is amazing. It's fantastic. It's really good. It's like one of the highlights of the history of Star Trek. If you are a Star Trek fan watching this video for some reason and you've gotten this far and you haven't seen Lower Decks yet, if you're a Trekkie, watch Lower Decks. If you're a Trekker, I can't imagine why you would still be watching this. I'm so sorry for painting you guys so badly when I talked about Trekkies and Trekkers. That if you are a Trekker, also watch Lower Decks. There's also like some TNG and a lot of TOS stuff in there. There's actually a lot of references also to the animated series, which is funny because the animated series has been referenced by almost literally nobody since it came out. Like, it hasn't, like, none of the stuff from the animated series has been in any of the other shows. Except Lower Decks, which is amazing. They even canonized the Orions, the blue Orions from the animated series. It's great. So I would love to end it there. Unfortunately, the history of Star Trek doesn't end there because somebody out there was like, hey, I have an idea. We've got Michelle Yeoh, who was just in the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, and everyone loves her. And she was in Star Trek, where she plays like an evil Mirrorverse character. Let's make a Star Trek action movie that's about her doing spy stuff. And we're gonna make bank, and it's great, and we can use all the footage that we were originally gonna use for the show that we were gonna make. But then the show got canceled because it turns out nobody wanted to watch it, and so we never aired the show. Instead, let's make it a movie, and let's get like 4% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's the worst thing that anyone has ever made, and it's so bad. Anyway, thank you for watching this video about the history of Star Trek. That brings us to now. They are continuing to make Star Trek. For one thing, Strange New Worlds is still going. Prodigy, I think, is still going. They're making a new show also called Starfleet Academy. There's a lot still going on in the world of Star Trek, but for the time being, that's Star Trek. As I said, thank you for watching. As I said before, this is kind of the direction the channel is going to be going in. I'm gonna like D&D shorts were fun while they happened. I think going forward, I'm going to be doing these kind of long, rambly, unscripted videos that don't really feature any research or editing and don't really have anything like appealing or interesting about them. Just basically me sitting in a chair and talking at you while a slideshow plays in the background for 2 straight hours. I know that everybody is going to be as excited about this as I am. And I know that it's going to be just a fun time. I'm going to get so many views. I'm going to quadruple my subscribership. Hold on, there was one more thing. What was the other thing? Oh, right. Happy April Fool's Day.